Hi, I'm Simon Ford. Back in June, police launched a murder inquiry after human remains were found in a field in Nottinghamshire. The bones were identified as those of Alfred-Swinscoe, a local coal miner. He went missing in 1967 from Pinxton in Derbyshire. For more than 5 decades, Alfred-Swinscoe's body lay buried near remote woodland. Now, detectives are tasked with working out who killed him and why. I've visited the scene with former major crime detective Jacques-Morrell to walk over the ground and discuss some of the theories surrounding the case.
So we're just at the side of the road that goes through to Sutton Ashfield from Ravenshead in North Nottinghamshire, and we just stepped off the road into some mixed woodland that's obviously been here for years. It's crisscrossed with paths, I think, where dog walkers certainly walk their dogs now, and we can see a large arable piece of farmland with crops on it, and in between the two there's a raised bank of earth that looks quite recently done. So this is where Alfred-Swinscoe was buried for 50 years, just down here off the road a bit further in. We're going to have a walk in now and see what we've got.
There's a rough lay-by there as well, isn't there? I don't know if that was here in the late 60s, but if you were going to dispose of a body, that's a good place to pull off the road, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And if we look at the street, you know, there's no street lighting. This is all right. It's not far from a built-up area, but there's no street lighting now. So at night, providing you can kill your lights and get yourself off the road, whatever traffic there was wouldn't be too interested in what a car was doing parked up for a time.
This is where they were working when they discovered the remains back in the spring. You're not going to dig here in the wood because of the tree roots, but right on the edge of the woodland. Would you say that was a good spot?
I think you're absolutely right. They probably took him through the woodland because it's less exposed, I suppose. And I say they, you know, it always has to be they, doesn't it? You know, one individual couldn't have done this task on his own. So, and they've taken the time. They probably had hours to do it and thought it through. I mean, if you look at the earth that's been moved here, and the other side of the road is a sand quarry. So it's probably fairly easy to move if you haven't got the tree roots, and you can see this bank of sandy soil with some stones in it as well. Look, yeah, I don't know, a couple of people digging down 6 foot. And young men, you probably do it in a couple of hours, and as we know, it was a very successful method of disposing of the body.
Now, the body may have been here for 56 years, but I can't imagine that the area's changed significantly, has it, Jack?
No, definitely not. I mean, this area was, and still is, it's quiet, it's sheltered. This mixed wood here has been there for a long, long time, and this field then at the side. We're within sight of the road. I can just see a van going off there, but I feel comfortable. No one. I mean, this is daylight. It's a frosty, cold morning. There's traffic going along there. You know, we're well out of the way here, aren't we?
Looking at the location now, there's easy public access to these woods. There's parking, it's an area, like we said, it's popular with dog walkers. And then, of course, there's the main road, which I imagine is busier now than it was in the late 60s. With this increase in activity, are you surprised the body wasn't discovered sooner? Maybe by a farmer tilling the field?
No, I'm not really. I mean, he was clearly buried to fit in with the narrative at the time, whatever that was, but that he disappeared, presumably of his own volition. You know, he'd gone and he wasn't coming back, and a lot of people must have accepted that. There seems to have been a missing person report at the time, but someone clearly convinced the police and anyone else concerned that he'd moved away. I know we're speculating there, but you know, that's clearly what's happened. People accepted that Alfred-Swinscoe wasn't coming back, but it was never treated as a murder investigation back in 1967.
Alfred-Swinscoe's remains were identified using familial DNA, and samples were taken from his daughter, we understand, who's now in her 80s, and they matched the unique genetic code recovered from the bones, right?
Yeah, as we well know, on our earlier sister podcast, the 6 o'clock knock, we covered familial DNA in some detail. It was the Aussie croc killer, Matthew White, who murdered a woman in northern Australia in, I think, about 2017, I think.
Meanwhile, back in Nottinghamshire, apart from the DNA testing, the police had very little to go on, as Assistant Chief Constable Rob-Griffin explained at that press conference.
We will use all of the investigative capabilities that we have now got, some of which were not available to us in 1967. Obviously, we have gotten used to using certain tactics in our investigations, such as telephone data, ANPR and CCTV, and that type of evidence will not be available to us, again, for fairly obvious reasons. So the investigation will be different, but we have got the capability, the ability and the resources to invest the time, energy and expertise into this investigation that we know will give the family the best chance of getting justice and seeing justice for Alfred.
Jack, just give me an idea of the uphill task facing the police in this case, facing the small team. What have they got to go on?
Well, I get the impression they're probably almost having to pick this up from scratch again. I know in the press release they talked about still looking for case material. You know, let's be honest, there's not going to be a lot. It's clear it wasn't treated as murder at the time. It was a missing person. I mean, I know from when I joined the job in 85, a missing person file was an A3 piece of paper folded into creating an A4 booklet of about 8 sides. Very procedural, and obviously on the back of that there would have been statements taken. But it all depends. It depends how plausible the explanation is of why this man has disappeared, and that no one really is too concerned about it. You know, it's fascinating because obviously we don't know, and I'm sure the police are going to have to pick up things like voters' registers for the time and just get a snapshot. We talked about it in earlier podcasts, haven't we, earlier episodes, a snapshot of a moment in time, and that snapshot would be the voters' register or the tenancy details for the people of Pinxton, this mining village at the time, and you can sort of start from there and see where people have gone and what they know.
There are 2 police forces involved in this, of course, aren't there? Pinxton is in Derbyshire. We're in Nottinghamshire, where the body was recovered all those years later. So what kind of complication does that add to the investigation?
Well, I guess they would have pretty standard forms and recording of stuff. But as I say, the likelihood of any of the case material, and when I say case material, we might be talking a cardboard folder of a few documents, if at all. And it's interesting now that Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire are part of the East Midlands regional crime for major crimes, so they now have come together.
Maybe that makes the job a bit easier.
That's the idea, although the staff and the officers are spread a bit more thinly, aren't they? But in theory, yes.
What the police do have is Alfred-Swinscoe's skeleton, but rob-griffin was unable to go into much detail about the forensic analysis. In fact, it sounds almost like he's deliberately keeping back information. Have a listen. What do you think?
The deceased had a number of areas of trauma about their body, and I still do not intend to be any more specific about those injuries. But when you put all of those circumstances together, we announced that this was a murder investigation, and that indeed is exactly what we have been running over the course of that time.
Maybe I'm sensationalising this a bit, but it sounds mysterious to me, Jack. Do you think the police are purposefully keeping something out of the public domain? And if they are, what reasons would they have for doing that?
Well, at the moment, his remains, Alfred-Swinscoe's remains, are all the police have got to go on. So they've got to keep a lot of that close to the chest. Why reveal everything, It's a simple fact. This is who he is. He's been there 56 years, and he died of non-accidental injury, shall we say, and his body was disposed of. And the burial site, I'm just looking around me now just to get a flavour of it. This was almost certainly not the scene of the murder, was it? This is the deposition of the body. Was there a conspiracy? I think people have sort of talked about, well, let's not get too carried away, but there has to be some form of conspiracy to dispose of someone's body in such a carefully planned way. This isn't the actions of one person. So of course there's a conspiracy. People have conspired and got together to dispose of the body and prevent the lawful burial of him at the end of the day.
There's speculation about organised crime. The police say they're keeping an open mind on that. What's your take on that? Organised crime?
I mean, I heard the journalist ask that. I suppose if we're going to try and sort of elaborate and make something more of it, this could be quite a simple story, but fascinating. But, let's not get carried away with motives, because the answer is potentially still out there. And let's assume as well that there was no news publicity about this at the time or since. So this is the only time that Alfred-Swinscoe's going missing has caught the public imagination. And why would that be? Well, the police must have been taken in by whatever scenario was painted by the community around Alfred-Swinscoe's disappearance. And it's important to remember as well that this isn't just a collection of bones of a skeleton in a field. This is someone's loved one, isn't it? This is a family man in a tight-knit community with several children. And somebody's been waiting for answers, even though they haven't had that publicity and there haven't been these appeals about what happened to him. It's just almost as though the story starts here.
Yeah, they have been, we know, waiting for answers for years and years. Generations of Alfred-Swinscoe's descendants around the world have now discovered, woken up to the fact, maybe literally heard it on the radio, seen it on their phone first thing in the morning, that their ancestor was murdered.
I know, and it's it almost makes you smile, doesn't it, Simon, that this story ends up in Australia, which we looked at before, because the news of the discovery of Alfred-Swinscoe's remains reached his great-granddaughter, I think, Charlotte Short, in Tamworth, New South Wales.
That's correct.
And she believes that the killer might have fled to Australia.
She, in fact, remembers her dad, Frank, who was one of Alfred's sons, telling her about how his dad went to the local pub, got tired, according to the story, and said he'd go home early, but was then never seen again.
Yeah, that's the narrative that seems to be coming out, but we need to know, don't we, or the police do need to know, did he get home that night? Who was he living with? Who was under the same roof as Alfred-Swinscoe? Maybe he lived alone and died of his injuries at home. Maybe that gave those responsible some thinking time. Who reported him missing and when? Was it a family member? Was it the following day? Or several days later? So Frank's comment, going back to that news report from Australia that he left the pub to go home early, if it was as odd as that, you think there would be a family media appeal repeated over the years? It seems to me, Simon, to be honest, that the whole thing has been brushed under the carpet.
Now, the Australian branch of the family wants to explore if the murderer or murderers moved to Australia as part of the assisted passage migration scheme. And like their relatives in the UK, of course, they want answers. Charlotte Short told 7 News Australia the murderer possibly moved away or immigrated to Australia back in 1967 or thereabouts. Many Brits were moving to Australia back then, hence the £10 POM. Now, they could be in their 80s plus or even dead, but somebody knows something, even if it's hearsay.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, are they being sensational, or are they hinting at something?
We just don't know, don't we? It's conjecture, like you said. We'd both need more to go on before reaching a conclusion. I don't like jumping to conclusions. The first thing I'd do would be to find Charlotte Short and approach her for an interview. If she wasn't up for that, I'd ask for a conversation off the record, just for background. But I think your copper's nous and my journalist nose agree on this. There's more to the case than meets the eye.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Check out our back catalogue of more than 50 episodes. You'll find us where you get your podcasts. And visit our website for bonus content, including a video from the location of this episode. We self-fund all our investigations, so please consider becoming a patron. And if there's a cold case down your way, well, let us know. We might just pay you a visit. Stay safe until we meet again for another Psycho Killer True Crime investigation.